Picture this. It is 3:14 in the morning, somewhere along the Zaporizhia axis. The air is cold, thick with the smell of diesel and wet earth. A Russian mechanized platoon is dug in along a tree line, concealed beneath camouflage netting, engines off, radios silent. By every conventional measure, they are invisible, thermal signatures suppressed, GPS coordinates shifted from their last known position. They have done everything right. And then, from somewhere above, not high above, not at the altitude of a cruise missile or a reconnaissance aircraft, but low, absurdly low, barely above the canopy, comes a sound. It is not the scream of a jet engine. It is not the thud of artillery. It is a hum, a quiet, insistent, almost insect-like hum. And before the platoon commander can even key his radio, the first vehicle detonates. Then the second. Then a munitions cache hidden 30 meters to the east. In 90 seconds, the entire position is neutralized. No satellite warning, no radar detection, no counter-battery fire. Just a swarm of machines no larger than a motorcycle, each carrying a shaped charge designed to pierce the top armor of a T-72. And every single one of them was guided not by a satellite thousands of miles in space, but by a 23-year-old operator named Amanda, sitting in a basement 14 kilometers away, watching everything unfold on a tablet screen the size of a paperback novel. This is not a scene from a near-future military thriller. This is Tuesday in Ukraine, and it has changed everything. The old world of warfare, the world of massed armor columns, of artillery duels measured in shells per hour, of air superiority doctrines built over 70 years of NATO planning. That world is now officially dead. It did not die in a single dramatic explosion. It died in 1,000 tiny ones. Ukraine's new drone strategy is not merely an evolution. It is a paradigm rupture, the kind of inflection point that military historians will mark as the moment the entire logic of ground combat inverted. For decades, the assumption was simple and ironclad. Mass wins. More tanks, more guns, more bodies. Russia built its entire military doctrine around this principle. Echelon warfare, deep battle, overwhelm the enemy with concentrated firepower on a narrow front, and breakthrough. It worked in 1943. It worked in Chechnya. It was supposed to work in Ukraine. It didn't. And the reason it didn't is not because Ukraine fielded a bigger army. It is because Ukraine fielded a smarter weapon, one that made the very concept of a front line meaningless. But while the world watched the fireballs on Telegram channels and marveled at the footage, something far more sinister was happening beneath the surface of this conflict, a complete architectural redesign of how Ukraine fights, commands, and kills. According to a classified briefing summary reviewed by analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, in London, Ukraine now operates an estimated 7 distinct categories of unmanned combat systems, integrated into a command structure that senior NATO officers have described as the most adaptive battlefield network since the introduction of combined arms doctrine in World War I. General James Hecker, former commander of U.S. Air Forces Europe, noted in a March 2025 panel at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, that Ukraine's drone integration has surpassed what most Western militaries have achieved in simulation, let alone in live combat. His exact words were sobering. They are writing doctrine in blood faster than we can write it in PowerPoint. And he was not exaggerating. The numbers are staggering. Ukraine's Ministry of Digital Transformation confirmed that in the first quarter of 2025 alone, the country produced over 300,000 first-person view drones domestically. 300,000. That is more individual aerial combat platforms than the total number of manned military aircraft produced by all NATO nations combined in the last 5 years. The cost per unit averages between $300 and $500 for a basic FPV kamikaze variant, less than a single 155mm artillery shell, which now costs NATO allies anywhere from $2,000 to $8,000 depending on the type. The asymmetry is not marginal, it is civilizational. Now let me walk you through the technical architecture, because the devil here is not just in the details. The devil is the details. Ukraine's current drone ecosystem operates on roughly 4 tiers. Tier 1 is the tactical FPV swarm, small, fast, disposable. These are your Frankenstein machines, often assembled in garages, basements, and repurposed electronics factories. They carry warheads ranging from standard RPG-7-shaped charges capable of penetrating up to 300 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor to custom-designed thermobaric payloads that generate overpressure waves inside enclosed spaces like bunkers and armored vehicles. Their operational range is typically 5 to 15 kilometers, with a flight time of roughly 8 to 12 minutes depending on battery load. They navigate using analog video feeds to avoid Russian electronic warfare jamming on standard digital frequencies, a critical adaptation that emerged after Russia deployed its Pol-21 and Shipovnik Aero EW systems along the Donbas front. Tier 2 is the medium-range strike drone. Platforms like the Ukrainian-made Leleka 100 or the commercially adapted Matrice 300 series, retrofitted with fragmentation munition dispensers. These operate at altitudes of 500 to 1,500 meters, serving as both reconnaissance platforms and light bombers, capable of loitering over a target for up to 40 minutes before deploying their payload. Tier 3 is the deep strike category. This is where things get genuinely terrifying for Moscow. Ukraine's Beaver and Lyuty drones, along with several classified variants developed in partnership with Baltic defense firms, now regularly strike targets 600 to over 1,000 kilometers behind the front lines. These are jet-powered or turboprop-driven platforms carrying warheads of up to 75 kilograms, guided by inertial navigation and terrain-matching algorithms that make them nearly immune to GPS jamming. They have hit oil refineries in Bashkortostan. They have struck military airfields in Saratov. They have reached targets deeper inside Russia than some of Moscow's own cruise missiles can reach inside Ukraine. And Tier 4, the one Russia fears most, is the autonomous coordination layer. This is not a drone. This is the brain. They believed their defenses were invincible. They were wrong, and the price of that error was fatal. Russia's electronic warfare apparatus was supposed to be the ultimate answer. For years, Moscow paraded its EW capabilities as the silver bullet against Western technological superiority. The Krasuka-4, a mobile electronic warfare system mounted on a Kamaz chassis, was designed to blind airborne radar systems at ranges exceeding 150 kilometers. The Zhetel system targeted satellite communications and GPS signals. The Pol-21 created GPS denial bubbles over entire sectors of the front, and for a while it worked. In the early months of the war, Ukrainian drone operators reported catastrophic loss rates. Sometimes 70 to 80% of launched FPVs would lose signal and crash before reaching their targets. Russian commanders celebrated. They published internal assessments claiming that electronic warfare had rendered the drone threat manageable. They were building their strategy around a wall of invisible frequencies, confident that no signal could penetrate, no link could survive. And then Amanda and thousands of operators like her figured out how to fly blind. The adaptation was deceptively simple, but tactically revolutionary. Ukrainian engineers began hard-coding flight paths directly into the drone's onboard microcontrollers. No GPS, no satellite link, no radio frequency communication during the terminal phase. The drone would be launched, guided visually by the operator through an analog video feed operating on frequencies that Russian electronic warfare systems were not calibrated to jam, and in the final seconds of flight, the operator would lock the target on screen, press a single button, and the drone's onboard processor would execute the final approach autonomously, using nothing but visual inertia and a pre-programmed descent angle. Russia's billion-dollar electronic warfare shield had been defeated by a software patch that cost less than a cup of coffee in Kyiv. Moreover, Ukrainian units began deploying what NATO analysts now call EW baiting, deliberately sending waves of cheap decoy drones broadcasting on known jammed frequencies, forcing Russian EW systems to activate and reveal their positions. Once the Krasuka or Pol-21 units lit up, a second wave of drones, these ones flying dark on analog feeds, would strike the EW systems themselves. It was a feedback loop of destruction. Russia was being forced to choose between keeping its electronic shield active and losing the shield entirely, or turning it off and letting the swarms through unchallenged. There was no good option, and the losses reflected it. According to open-source intelligence compiled by the Oryx Verification Project and corroborated by satellite imagery from Maxar Technologies, Russia lost over 1,100 confirmed armored vehicles in the first 4 months of 2025 alone, a rate that exceeds the total armored losses of most modern conflicts in their entirety. Of those losses, analysts at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London estimated that between 55 and 65% were attributable directly to drone strikes rather than traditional anti-tank weapons or artillery. Let that sink in. More than half of Russia's armored casualties are now being inflicted by machines that cost less than a used laptop. But while the media focused on the spectacular explosions, while Telegram channels racked up millions of views on footage of turrets flying off T-90s, something far more strategically significant was unfolding, something that strikes directly at the heart of Russia's ability to sustain this war. Ukraine's drone campaign is not just destroying vehicles, it is destroying logistics, and logistics is the one thing that no army, no matter how large, can survive without. Deep strike drones operating in Tier 3 have systematically targeted Russian fuel depots, ammunition storage facilities, rail junctions, and repair yards hundreds of kilometers behind the front. The Lyuty drone, with its 75-kilogram warhead and 1,000-kilometer range, has become Moscow's nightmare, not because of any single strike, but because of the cumulative effect. A fuel depot destroyed in Voronezh does not just remove fuel from the equation. It forces Russia to reroute supply convoys along longer, more exposed roads. Those convoys then become targets for Tier 1 FPV swarms operating near the front. The replacement vehicles sent to compensate for the destroyed ones become targets themselves. Each successful strike creates a cascade of secondary vulnerabilities, and Ukraine has learned to exploit every single one of them. Retired Colonel Markus Reisner of the Austrian Bundesheer, one of Europe's most respected military analysts, described it in a February 2025 interview with Die Welt as logistical suffocation. He said, "Ukraine is not trying to win a single decisive battle. They are trying to make every Russian position slowly starve of fuel, of ammunition, of spare parts, of morale, and the drones are the instrument of that starvation." This isn't just a battlefield in Eastern Europe. In a moment, I'll show you how this shift just hit your own bank account, because the economic shockwaves of this drone revolution are rippling across global defense budgets, energy markets, and the future price of everything from oil to microchips. The financial dimension of Ukraine's drone war is something that almost no mainstream outlet is covering with the seriousness it deserves. Consider this. The United States defense budget for fiscal year 2025 allocated approximately $13.8 billion for traditional manned fighter aircraft procurement, F-35s, F-15EX Eagles, upgrades to the B-21 Raider program. $13.8 billion. Ukraine's entire domestic drone production budget for the same year is estimated at approximately $2.5 billion, funded through a combination of state allocation, international aid, and private sector investment. For roughly 18% of what America spends on manned aircraft alone, Ukraine has built a drone force that is arguably inflicting more daily battlefield damage than any air force on Earth. This ratio has sent shockwaves through the Pentagon. Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks acknowledged in a January 2025 address at the Reagan National Defense Forum that the Department of Defense is undergoing what she called a fundamental reevaluation of platform cost-effectiveness ratios. Bureaucratic language, for a simple truth, the $100 million fighter jet may no longer be the king of the battlefield. The Replicator initiative, launched by the DoD in 2023 and expanded aggressively in 2024, aims to field thousands of autonomous and semi-autonomous drone systems across all service branches by 2026. But insiders at the Defense Innovation Unit have privately admitted that Ukraine is already 2 to 3 years ahead of where the US military is in terms of real-world drone integration. They are not learning from textbooks. They are learning from Amanda, from operators who fly 12-hour shifts in basements, who have developed an intuitive understanding of swarm tactics that no simulation can replicate. And here is where the geopolitical picture darkens considerably, because Russia is adapting too, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. In March 2025, Russian defense contractor Kronstadt announced accelerated production of the Orion UCAV, a medium-altitude, long-endurance drone capable of carrying up to 4 precision-guided munitions with a flight ceiling of 7,500 meters and an endurance of 24 hours. Moscow has also begun deploying the Lancet 3M, an upgraded loitering munition with an extended range of 70 kilometers and a new dual seeker head combining infrared and visual targeting, making it significantly harder to decoy. More ominously, Russian military bloggers linked to the GRU have reported the testing of AI-assisted target recognition systems on the Lancet platform, systems allegedly developed with technical consultation from Chinese defense AI firm Norinco's subsidiary research labs. If confirmed, and both the Estonian Foreign Intelligence Service and Britain's GCHQ have indicated they consider the reports credible, this would represent a significant escalation in the technological dimension of the war. While the world debated sanctions and peace summits, while diplomats exchanged carefully worded communiques, a silent arms race in artificial intelligence was accelerating beneath the surface, one that neither side can afford to lose, and one whose consequences extend far beyond the borders of Ukraine. The artificial intelligence dimension of this war is no longer theoretical, it is operational, and it is evolving at a pace that has left even the most forward-thinking defense planners scrambling to keep up. Ukraine's Ministry of Digital Transformation, led by the quietly influential Mikhailo Fedorov, has partnered with at least 14 private sector AI companies, some Ukrainian, some from NATO member states operating under carefully worded, non-military consulting agreements, to develop what insiders call the Hive Logic framework. The name is not accidental. Hive Logic is not a single piece of software. It is an ecosystem, a layered decision support architecture that takes raw data from hundreds of drone feeds, satellite passes, signals intelligence intercepts, and ground sensor networks, and synthesizes it into a single operational picture that updates in near real time. A battalion commander on the Zaporizhzhia front no longer stares at a paper map with grease pencil markings. He stares at a tablet showing algorithmically prioritized target sets, predicted enemy movement corridors based on 72 hours of pattern-of-life analysis, and recommended strike windows calculated down to the minute. Amanda does not just fly a drone. Amanda receives a targeting package generated by a machine learning model that has ingested 6 months of thermal imagery and movement data from her specific sector. She validates the target visually, confirms the approach vector, and executes. The entire kill chain, from detection to neutralization, has been compressed from hours to minutes, in some cases, seconds. But here is what should terrify every strategic planner in Moscow, Washington, and Beijing alike. Hive Logic is not the ceiling, it is the floor. Ukrainian developers have confirmed in closed-door briefings with European defense officials, details of which were partially leaked to the Financial Times in April 2025, that the next iteration of the system will include autonomous engagement authorization for specific categories of targets in specific predefined scenarios. In plain language, the drone will be able to decide to strike without a human pressing the final button, not in every case, not against every target, but in scenarios where communication links are severed, which happens constantly in the EW-saturated environment of the Donbass. The drone will have the authority to identify, classify, and engage a target based entirely on its own onboard processing. The ethical implications are staggering, the military implications are even more so. Because a drone that does not need a data link cannot be jammed. A drone that makes its own decisions cannot be deceived by feeding false signals to its operator. A drone that operates autonomously inside an electronic warfare bubble is, for all practical purposes, immune to Russia's primary defensive strategy, and Ukraine is not the only one moving in this direction. There were only 90 minutes left in the operational window. The battery levels on 43 FPV units, hovering in a staggered formation over a Russian staging area near Tokmak, were dropping toward critical thresholds. Amanda and her team had identified a column of 14 vehicles, a mix of BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles and MT-LB armored transports, staging for what signals intelligence suggested was a counterattack planned for dawn. The Hive Logic system flagged the column as a priority alpha target. Recommended engagement, immediate. And then the Russian EW systems activated. Every digital feed went black. 12 of the 43 drones lost navigation and spiraled into the ground, but 31 kept flying. They were running on analog, they were running on visual lock, and they were running on code that did not need permission from a basement 14 kilometers away. What happened in the next 6 minutes has not been officially confirmed by Kyiv, but satellite imagery from Planet Labs, reviewed independently by analysts at Jane's Defense, showed 14 burnt-out vehicle hulks in a scattered pattern consistent with a swarm engagement, 31 drones, 14 vehicles, 0 human commands in the terminal phase. This was not the future of warfare. This was April 2025. And Russia knows it is losing the technology race on this axis. The response from Moscow has been characteristically blunt, not innovation, but escalation through mass. Unable to match Ukraine's drone sophistication unit for unit, Russia has instead attempted to overwhelm through volume, deploying thousands of Iranian-designed Shahed 136 one-way attack drones against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. But the Shahed is a strategic terror weapon, not a tactical battlefield system. It flies at predictable altitudes, along predictable corridors, at predictable speeds. Ukraine's air defense networks, augmented by Western-supplied NASAMS, IRIS-T, and Gepard systems, now intercept between 70 and 85% of incoming Shaheds on any given night. The Shahed causes suffering, it causes fear, but it does not change the battlefield geometry. Ukraine's FPV swarms do, and that asymmetry is becoming more pronounced with every passing week. General Oleksandr Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, stated in a rare public address in March 2025 that drone operations now account for what he described as the decisive majority of confirmed enemy equipment losses along the entire line of contact. He did not provide a specific percentage. He did not need to. The wreckage speaks for itself. So where does this lead? The analysts at RUSI, CSIS, and the International Institute for Strategic Studies have broadly converged on 3 possible trajectories for the next 12 to 18 months. The first is managed de-escalation. In this scenario, the sheer unsustainability of Russian losses, both in men and material, forces Moscow to accept some form of negotiated settlement, likely brokered through back-channel communications involving Turkey, China, and the Gulf states. The drone war, in this view, becomes the decisive pressure mechanism that makes the cost of continued offensive operations politically unbearable for the Kremlin. The front lines freeze. A cold peace descends. Nobody wins, but the killing slows. The second trajectory is regional realignment. In this scenario, the drone revolution demonstrated by Ukraine triggers a massive global rearmament cycle. NATO nations accelerate autonomous weapons development programs. China pours resources into counter-drone and drone swarm technologies. Iran expands its already prolific drone export program to non-state actors across the Middle East and North Africa. The war in Ukraine becomes a proving ground whose lessons metastasize into every future conflict on Earth, from the Taiwan Strait to the Sahel. The third trajectory is the one that keeps Pentagon planners awake at 3 in the morning: total escalation. In this scenario, Russia, unable to reverse its battlefield losses through conventional means and unwilling to accept strategic defeat, crosses a threshold that has remained inviolate since 1945. The use of a tactical nuclear weapon, not against a city, but against a concentration of Ukrainian forces or a critical logistics hub, as a desperate attempt to reset the battlefield calculus. Western intelligence agencies have assessed this scenario as low probability but non-zero, and the probability increases in direct proportion to the severity of Russian conventional losses. The drone swarms that are saving Ukrainian lives today could, in a catastrophic irony, become the trigger for the single most dangerous escalation in human history. But here is the truth that transcends all 3 scenarios. The truth that Amanda knows instinctively every time she picks up her controller in that cold basement and sends another machine into the dark sky. The age of the mass army is over. The age of the $100 million weapons platform as the arbiter of victory is over. What has replaced it is something faster, cheaper, smarter, and infinitely more adaptive. It is a revolution not of firepower, but of access. The democratization of lethality itself. A nation of 40 million people, outgunned and outmanned by one of the largest military powers on Earth, has rewritten the rules of combat in real time, with commercial electronics, open-source software, and the sheer relentless ingenuity of operators who learned their craft not at war colleges, but on battlefields. Russia entered this war believing that mass would prevail, that enough tanks, enough shells, enough bodies would eventually crush Ukrainian resistance. They were wrong, and the instrument of their miscalculation was not a superweapon designed in a classified laboratory. It was a $500 drone, guided by a young woman with a tablet, flying through a wall of electronic noise, striking with a precision that no doctrine predicted and no defense could stop. The skies over the Donbas no longer belong to artillery. They belong to the swarm, and the swarm does not sleep. It does not negotiate. It does not stop. It simply adapts. And in the cold mathematics of modern war, adaptation is the only currency that matters.